Welcome to another episode of Explained by AI. Today, we're going to be doing a deep dive into the story of Ted Bundy. He did some really bad things a long time ago, and you guys might have heard his name before.
Yeah,
But just get ready because it's like a movie except it's real.
that's right. Ted Bundy was a serial killer in the United States back in the 1970s. And what's really interesting and also scary is that he didn't look or act like what people think a bad guy should.
Right.
He was described as charming and smart. He even went to law school.
He went to law school.
Yeah. Can you believe that?
Wow, that's kind of mind-blowing. You would think someone studying law would be trying to stop criminals, not become one.
Exactly. And that's what made him so dangerous. He used his intelligence to plan his crimes and trick people. He knew how to make people trust him, which made it easier for him to hurt them.
So he was basically hiding in plain sight. That's terrifying. How did he even get his victims to go with him? Was he like a magician or something?
Yeah. He was clever, that's for sure. One of his tricks was to pretend to be injured, like wearing a fake cast or a sling. Then he would ask young women for help. He knew people would want to help someone who seemed hurt.
Ugh, that is so awful. He used people's kindness against them.
He did. And sometimes he even pretended to be a police officer.
Oh, ah.
Can you imagine thinking you're safe because a police officer is there? And it turns out to be the bad guy.
Oh, that sends chills down my spine. So did he just stay in one place and do these things? Or was he like all over the place?
He actually committed crimes in many different states across the U.S. This made it hard for the police to catch him because they didn't realize they were dealing with the same guy at first.
Right.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces are scattered everywhere.
It sounds like he was always one step ahead.
Yeah.
So how did they finally stop him? Was it like a big car chase or something?
Yeah. It was a series of dramatic events, actually. It started with a simple traffic stop. Back in 1975, an officer in Utah stopped Bundy for a traffic violation. Just a normal routine check. But the officer had a hunch something wasn't right and noticed some suspicious items in his car.
Really?
Burglary tools, which made the officer think this was more than just a simple traffic stop.
Wow, that officer's gut feeling really paid off. So he went to jail right then and there.
Well, not exactly. Bundy was clever, remember? He knew how to use his charm and smarts to his advantage, even in court. He even tried to represent himself at one point.
He represented himself. So he thought he could be his own lawyer. That's crazy. But he didn't get away with it, right?
No, thankfully he didn't. But get this. While he was waiting for his trial for murder in Colorado, he escaped from jail.
What?
Not once, but twice.
How did he do that? Was he like some kind of secret agent or something?
The first time he jumped out of a second-story window in the courthouse during a hearing and was on the run for 6 days.
He jumped out a window. That's like something you'd see in an action movie. What about the second escape? Was it even crazier?
Yeah, the second time he saw a hole right through the ceiling of his cell and slipped away. It was pretty daring. And unfortunately, it led to even more terrible things happening down in Florida.
That's unbelievable. He
Sure.
sounds like he thought he was invincible or something. So even after being caught, he escaped and continued doing these horrible things. How did they finally put an end to all of this?
Well, it was in Florida in 1978. A police officer saw Bundy driving a stolen car and pulled him over. And it turned out to be the break they needed to finally catch him for good.
That officer must have been pretty sharp to notice he was driving a stolen car. It sounds like paying attention to details is really important.
Absolutely. That officer's gut feeling that something was off was crucial. You know, it shows that sometimes you have to trust your instincts. But getting Bundy into custody wasn't easy. He resisted arrest, and the officer even had to fire a warning shot.
Wow. It sounds like it was a pretty intense situation. But they finally got him right. No more escapes after that.
Nope. This time there was no escaping. Bundy was finally behind bars where he belonged. But capturing him was just the beginning. They still had to prove he was guilty of all the terrible things he had done.
So what happened next? Did he just admit to everything?
Not at first. His trial became a huge media event. It was one of the first trials to be shown on TV, so people all over the country were glued to their screens watching everything unfold. Bundy, always wanting to be the center of attention, decided to represent himself in court again. He seemed to enjoy addressing the jury directly, almost as if he was putting on a show.
It's so strange that he seemed to like all the attention, especially considering he was on trial for murder. It's like he wanted to be famous, even if it was for all the wrong reasons.
You're hitting on something important there. Bundy was a complex character, and his need for attention was a big part of who he was. But back to the trial. One crucial piece of evidence changed everything.
What was it? Did someone see him do something?
It was something a lot of people wouldn't think about: bite marks. Bundy had a very distinct bite pattern, and a sheriff investigating the case believed that these bite marks could be the key to convicting him.
Wait, so he bit his victims. That's awful. But how did they know those bites were from him?
Well, they needed to get a dental impression from Bundy to compare, but he wasn't cooperating, so they got a warrant for his mouth.
He got a warrant for his mouth. I've never heard of that.
It might sound strange, but it was completely legal. This meant they had the right to take impressions of his teeth whether he liked it or not. The sheriff was determined to make this work. He took Bundy to his own dentist under super tight security, even using a special leg brace to make sure Bundy couldn't try to escape again.
That sheriff was really dedicated to his job. So did the bite marks match.
They did. It was a perfect match. The sheriff's persistence paid off.
That must have been a huge moment in the case, like solving a really complicated puzzle.
Right.
So with this evidence and everything else, was Bundy found guilty?
Yes, he was. The jury found him guilty, and he was sentenced to death in 1979.
Wow, what a roller coaster ride this story is. So after years of escaping justice, Bundy was finally held accountable for his crimes. It must have been a relief for the victims' families to finally see him get what he deserved.
It was a small bit of comfort in a truly horrible situation, but Bundy's story wasn't over yet. He spent 10 years on death row, trying every legal trick in the book to avoid his sentence. And it was during this time that he started to confess to some of his crimes. But even then, many believed he was still holding back, and that the true number of his victims might never be known.
That's really sad. So many families left wondering what truly happened to their loved ones. It seems like even though he was caught, he still wanted to keep some things secret. Did he ever explain why he did these things? Like, did he ever give a reason?
That's the big question, isn't it? People have been trying to understand why someone would do such things for decades. Some believe it had to do with his childhood, which was pretty messed up. He grew up thinking his mom was a sister, which couldn't have been easy. Others think he just couldn't connect with people emotionally and needed to feel powerful.
Yeah, it seems like there's no easy answer. Sometimes people do bad things. It's just hard to understand why. So what happened to Bundy in the end?
On January 24, 1989, at 42 years old, Ted Bundy was executed in Florida's electric chair. His case had drawn so much media attention that there were even crowds gathered outside the prison, chanting, "Burn, Bundy burn." It was a dark chapter in American history, and this stark reminder that evil can hide in plain sight.
It's hard to believe that someone who seems so normal could be capable of such cruelty. It's like a reminder to always be careful and trust your instincts. You never really know who you're dealing with.
You're absolutely right. Bundy's story is a chilling reminder that we should never let our guard down completely. But it's also important to remember that people like him are very rare. Most people in the world are good and kind.
That's a good point. It's important to be aware of the bad things that can happen, but not let fear take over our lives. So even though Bundy's story is dark and disturbing, are there any positive things that we can learn from it?
Definitely. One thing we can learn is the importance of being observant and aware of our surroundings. Another is to trust our gut instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. We can also learn from the bravery of Bundy's surviving victims. Their stories are a testament to the strength of the human spirit. And we should never forget the dedication of the law enforcement officers who worked tirelessly to bring him to justice.
Yeah, you're right. Even in the darkest of stories, there are always glimmers of hope and courage. But there's one thing we haven't talked about yet. What about Bundy's girlfriend at the time? Did she know about his dark side?
That's a great question. His long-term girlfriend, Elizabeth, did have suspicions. She found strange things in his apartment, like a meat cleaver and women's clothing that weren't hers.
A meat cleaver? That's super creepy.
It is. She even reported him to the police after seeing a sketch of the suspect on TV. But for a long time, she held on to the belief that he couldn't possibly be guilty. She even visited him in jail while he was awaiting trial.
Wow. It's amazing how love can sometimes blind us to the truth. But I guess it just goes to show that even someone as manipulative as Bundy could fool people who cared about him.
Exactly. He was very good at creating a false image of himself. But in the end, the truth always comes out. And Elizabeth eventually realized the horrifying reality of who Bundy really was.
That must have been a devastating realization for her. To think that the person you love is capable of such horrific things, it's hard to even imagine.
It is. It's a stark reminder that people aren't always who they seem. And it highlights the importance of critical thinking and being willing to question things, even when it's difficult.
It sounds like his case was a major turning point in how the media covered crime, too, especially with the trial being televised. Did that affect the case in any way?
Absolutely. Bundy's trial was one of the first to be broadcast on national television, and it captivated the nation. People were fascinated by this seemingly charming and intelligent man who was accused of such terrible crimes. The media attention definitely added to his notoriety, and some argue that it even influenced the way the trial was conducted.
It's hard to imagine what it would have been like to have your trial broadcast to the whole country. It must have been incredibly stressful for everyone involved, especially the victims' families.
It certainly was. For the victims' families, it meant reliving their trauma in a very public way. It's a reminder that behind every sensationalized crime story, there are real people who are suffering. And we should always remember their pain and suffering, even as we try to understand the crime itself.
It's a delicate balance for sure, and it's something we as consumers of media need to be aware of, being critical of what we see and hear, and not letting ourselves be swayed by emotional manipulation or biased reporting. But I think we've talked about enough about the media. I read somewhere that Bundy used to go back to the places where he buried his victims. Is that true?
Yes, unfortunately, it's true. Bundy admitted to returning to the sites where he had buried his victims. He claimed that he would groom the bodies and perform sexual acts with them.
Oh, that is just beyond creepy. I don't even know what to say. It's just so disturbing.
It is. It's a chilling reminder of the depths of his depravity and lack of remorse.
Well,
It's hard to comprehend that kind of behavior.
it really is.
Right.
But it brings up another question. You know how Bundy kind of resembled his first love? Did all of his victims look like her? Like, was he specifically targeting women who reminded him of her?
That's a theory that's been discussed by a lot of people. Many of his victims did share some physical similarities, like having long dark hair parted in the middle. And remember, his first love, Stephanie, broke up with him years earlier. It's possible that he was subconsciously seeking revenge on women who reminded him of her.
Wow, that's a pretty intense thought.
Yeah.
So his crimes weren't just random acts of violence. They were fueled by this deep-seated anger and inability to deal with rejection.
You're right. It adds a whole other layer of complexity to his motives. And it's a reminder that even though we may never fully understand what drives someone to commit such horrific acts, there are often psychological factors at play.
It's also disturbing, but also fascinating. It's like trying to solve a puzzle, but the pieces are all jumbled up. Did they ever find out exactly how many victims there were?
Unfortunately, no. Bundy confessed to 30 murders, but some believe the true number could be much higher. He hinted at this in some of his interviews, suggesting that he had information that the authorities didn't know. It's a horrifying thought, and it's likely that we'll never know the full extent of his crimes.
That's really sad to think about. All those families left wondering about their loved ones. It just goes to show the lasting impact of his actions.
But there's one last thing I'm curious about. Didn't Bundy have a daughter while he was on death row?
You're right, he did. While on death row, Bundy married Carol Ann Boone, a woman who believed in his innocence. And they even had a daughter together named Rose.
Wait, how's that even possible? Could they, have conjugal visits in prison? The details surrounding Rose's conception are still a bit of a mystery. There were rumors of conjugal visits being allowed in Florida prisons back then. But nobody knows for sure what really happened.
It's just another strange twist in this already bizarre story. I can't imagine what it must be like for Rose, growing up knowing who her father was and the horrible things that he did. That must be a really heavy burden to carry.
It is, and it's a reminder that the consequences of Bundy's actions extend far beyond his own life. It affects his family, and it will continue to affect future generations.
It's a sobering thought. So even after all these years, Ted Bundy's story continues to fascinate and horrify. But I think we've covered just about everything there is to cover.
I agree. We've explored the dark side of Ted Bundy, from his crimes and manipulative tactics to the media frenzy and the unanswered questions that still linger.
It's been a long and winding journey, but I think we've all learned a lot about the complexities of human nature, the importance of being aware of our surroundings, and the fact that you can never truly know what's going on inside someone else's mind.
That's a great way to sum it up. Bundy's story is a reminder that evil can wear many faces, and that it's up to each of us to be vigilant, to trust our instincts, and to never forget the victims and their families.
Well said. It's a reminder that we should never forget the victims and their families, and we should continue to learn from these tragedies so we can work toward creating a safer world for everyone. Do you have any topic that you would like to have explained? Drop it in the comments.